Play Typer Guy podcast. I'm Stephen Robinson. Joining me today is writer, comedian, and actress Tess Rafferty. She's author of the 2012 culinary memoir, Recipes for Disaster, and the Cat Kelly Mystery Series. Tess has written extensively for television and was the supervising producer and only woman writer on The Soup, where she played my personal favorite Spice Girl. So let's get into this while my wife is still listening. Hey, Tess, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good with an asterisk, as I feel we all are these days.
I love your Cat Kelly mystery novel series. I'm a huge fan of mysteries in general, but I love you also. You had written something that stood out to me because I think it spoke to what I like about mysteries and then like what we are experiencing now. I'll just read it real quick. You said, I find watching a murder mystery incredibly satisfying in our uncertain times. There is an agreement between the show and the viewer that at the end of the program, you will get an answer to the question, who done it? And the bad guy will see justice. It's incredibly cathartic when you're living in a time short on answers and you're watching as so many men, including one who may be president again, skirt the law. So that just really resonated with me. Can you talk a bit about, obviously, the words you wrote?
I sort of came to that conclusion. I posited the thesis when I was pitching the Cat Kelly series. It was under option by Warner Brothers, probably around 2017, 2018. So
Wow.
we were very much in the middle of the Trump administration. The first book was, and then the other ones sort of came later. And the other books came later, that is. So, because you're doing a pitch, you have to really think about, how do I sell this? And, I'm like you, I'm a huge lover of mysteries, and I always have been. And one of the things I thought about was, if we go back to the early aughts when we were all much younger and going out at night, and I was doing stand up in Los Angeles. So I would go out to do shows or see shows, or sometimes just go out with friends. And the distinction about that period of time is that we didn't have streaming like we do today, and A&E was running Law and Order 4 times a day. And so you have this kind of young, hip comics and people, but everybody's doing jokes about Law and Order because everybody's watching it, because it's on when you're getting ready to go out, and it's on when you come home at night and you're, having your sandwich before you go to bed because you want to soak up your alcohol or whatever. It was on all the time. So I thought about that and my love of mysteries, and I thought about, how am I selling, how do we communicate that people love mysteries and people need mysteries, and that why these things are so popular. And given that backdrop, it was really the only thing I could read at the time myself, because night terrors. And I just realized, like, this, it's everything. It's escapism, right? A lot of mysteries take place in different locations, and the Agatha Christie genre is, of course, the fancy people and fancy hotels, of course. But it is that comfort of, they got this. You are gonna, by the end of this hour, you're going to find out who did it. So you don't have to be anxious the whole time, like with some of the TV shows that we watch, where it's week to week and they're never going to catch who did it, and even if they do, it's not going to matter, and that sort of anxiety porn, I guess, that's very popular now.
We want catharsis, and we want, which I love about mysteries and suspense. I mean, Hitchcock's work, which is obviously slightly different, but I just love the idea of normal people in extraordinary situations is always interesting. To how do we reveal ourselves? What happens in those scenarios? And that's what I love about mysteries. And so it's kind of like, oh, this couple is just doing the normal cute big, on a vacation, and then things start to escalate, which, given your background, mysteries are so well structured, like comedies, right? Like, I remember having that go off in my head once when I was watching Meet the Parents ages ago, when the first one, because it's just like, right, everything just starts and goes terrible and terrible and terrible. It's the opposite of Goodfellas, where everything's starting, everything's great. Like, oh my wonderful, because that's a tragedy. Like, everything's going wonderful, and then it goes to hell. but comedies, everything's going, just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And then they start to twist around and we feel that relief. And I think, you sort of do that very well. Do you find any of that? Do you make that connection in your work, a part of your being a very funny person, a comedian?
Well, I think it's rhythm. One of the things I think about myself and my writing, particularly when I was doing comedy, was I hear a rhythm. I hear a rhythm for dialogue, like how it's supposed to be, um, the rat-a-tat-tat or whatever that is for what you're writing. It's not always rat-a-tat-tat, but it is. You hear it. I hear how it's supposed to work in my head, and I never really thought much about it. But my husband's also a comedy writer, and he sees everything visually. Like that's how he sees his comedy, is he sees how it's unfurling and I hear it. So I do think that there's things that get ingrained in you and you process them however it is you do. And so, one thing was comedy, right? We've watched so much great comedy growing up, and we had the luxury of reruns and all the time for all these shows. And then one day when you start writing your own comedy, you realize, oh, these are the things I've internalized watching all of this. And so I do think it's a similar thing about mysteries, is that it is a structure that you've internalized when you have read so many mysteries. And then, like all writing, it's finding the next thing to do with it, like to make it your own. It's funny to me, and it makes me think about, the subject everywhere is AI these days, generative AI. And there's a certain amount of, everybody, it's a very sensitive subject with a lot of people, particularly a lot of creatives. But when I look how AI learns, I'm like, well, that's how we all learned. We took it all in and we processed it. And then the trick, and not everyone does this, and we all don't do this all the time, the trick is to make it different, to put your own spin on it. And sometimes people don't put their own spin on it, and they make a lot of money anyway. They're very successful, and a lot of people enjoy their projects. So
I love the Kinsey Milhone books when I was a kid, but like the Hardboiled Detective. But I think your stuff sort of is often in line of that, but also just a sort of romanticism and the fun and the lightness, while also being in this sort of dark scenario of, obviously, people are, someone dies.
people are dying. I wanted something like Moonlighting or Heart to Heart or Nick and Nora, the old Thin Man series, because I like that escape for me personally. I've read a lot of different mystery books. And I got to a point, again, probably in the Trump years, where I was like, I can't read another woman not being believed book. And it's the girl on the train and the woman in cabin 10 and the on and on and on. It's like there's always a woman who knows what's going on, and everyone thinks she's crazy or she's an alcoholic or whatever, are you on your medication? And it's like, I can't read this one more time because we're living it every day. I wanted a story where I wanted a thing where the woman's empowered and you believe her, and it's also funny and you're having fun and you get to talk, you talks a little bit about the history of the region and the food you're eating, and that makes you think, well, yeah, I mean, if I was on vacation and someone did happen to get murdered, I could probably solve it on my own.
The only Woody Allen film that really still holds up for me, and despite all of his the issues and controversies there, is Manhattan Murder Mystery. One, it's a mystery, but also there's just real stakes, and it feels like the couple are dealing with real things. It doesn't feel like the stuff that, oh, no wonder I liked this when I was 19, because it's a 40-something-year-old man like whining about why don't people understand me or get why I'm better than they are, which appealed to me at 19. But wait a minute, now that I'm actually in my 40s, I don't really, that's kind of whiny, and I shouldn't be dating a 17-year-old at 43 years old. Like, that's a weird thing. Like, yeah. I'm like, why? I don't connect with this. But the mystery is like, oh, we've been married for a while, and what if our neighbors died, and would we investigate it? And it also connects to things in your own relationship, which I love about the couple, because there are things that my wife and I kind of respond like, and you could plug that into the mystery, like the being of like, well, this is weird. And me being like, who cares? I don't care what the neighbor does. I just want to do, or vice versa. But the idea of how couples and exploring that then could explore the larger situation, which is really fun.
How we respond to things and how we respond to each other. It's funny you mentioned Manhattan Murder Mystery because it is the second time I have thought about it this week. And I was watching one thing or another. Let's just say it was on BritBox because that's probably where it was. And I was thinking about this couple, the couple in crime, right? The Nick and Nora of it all. And it's always been a passion of mine. But when I was a little kid, I saw things like Remington Steele and Moonlighting. And so I always thought the most romantic thing you could do is meet a man, fall in love, and solve murders together. But it is, and I remember when Manhattan Murder Mystery came out, they were saying it's a couple who like kind of reconnects or rekindles through this. And I think it's an interesting trope about the sexiness and romance that go kind of hand in hand to sleuthing and murder. It's kind of an interesting thing, but that's what happens is if you don't have a husband and wife or a couple solving it to begin with, they are going to be a couple by the time it ends.
Oh yeah. Well, if like in North by Northwest, and again, mysteries are very different than suspense thrillers, but I just love character-wise that kind of how it works. And we start with, Cary Grant, and everything it's the whole kind of wrong man thing starts to escalate. But at the end, and he's with Eva Marie Saint, and he's talking, but she's asking, why did you get divorced before? And he was like, my wife thought I was dull. And we're, after watching this, be like, well, wait a minute, you're Cary Grant, but you've been doing all this stuff. But it puts it, oh, right, this situation brought out the inherent Cary Grant in this character, because before he, despite looking like Cary Grant, wasn't. He was just this kind of probably fussy business guy. And I love the idea of like situations that can really make us learn about ourselves or push us about ourselves.
We go, why are all these couples solving mysteries? Well, and to transition to what you're talking about, it's about the happy ending. Right. We all want love and we all want justice. And we all want to feel smart. We all want to be like, hey, we did that. We brought someone to justice. We figured it out when the cops couldn't, and we fell in love along the way. And what's a happier ending than that?
It's one of the first things I remember after the election. And I've been well of your work prior to that. As I mentioned in the intro, so in case people want to know the mystery, you played my personal favorite Spice Girl on The Soup. That, of course, is, now that people have seen you, if they hadn't seen you, they might have already guessed. That was, of course, Posh Spice. She always stood out to me because of the dress and the poshness.
We did a lot with it's so funny because all I did was really stand there with the wig and the sunglasses, and I think a couple of times I said major. But the makeup artist was doing more work on my cheekbones to make them look very like pronounced and concave and everything than I was probably doing in that. But that was super fun. We had fun on that show. We didn't take anything too seriously. I mean, most of the time we didn't take anything too seriously, so it was good.
But you wrote, not long after the 2016 election outcome, election aftermath. I'll drop like the link to that in here or a clip of it.
Let me say it right here. If you voted for Trump, I do think you're a racist. I do think you're homophobic. I do think you're a misogynist. Racism and homophobia and misogyny are all a spectrum, and you're on it. You might not be a cheering while a black man gets lynched racist, but boy, did you just sell them the rope and look the other way. Don't like getting painted with the broad brush of racism? Now you know what it feels like when you get told that you want to rip a baby out of a mother's womb at 9 months, when that's not what happens. That's never what happens. You want to call yourself a Christian? Then look inside yourself and try to find some compassion for these women who get told in their 3rd trimester that their baby's not going to live. They've already had the shower. They've already decorated the nursery. They already know the sex and probably have a name picked out. But look at all that and keep screaming baby killers at them and not voting for the candidates who are defending their biological necessity to have to do the unthinkable, and I think I'm still cool calling you a racist. I tried to be polite, but now I just don't give a damn, because let's be honest, we don't live in polite America anymore. We live in grab 'em by the pussy America now. So thank you for that. Being polite was exhausting.
You sort of drew a line of like, things are never going to be the same. Like, people made a choice that, you know, you can't really come back for. You side it with racism or misogyny, and yet people kept making that choice. There are a lot of people who made it in 2020 again, and now there's the risk that a lot of people might still make it in white people,
Yeah.
I should say.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
Fair.
But
yeah.
or specifically white men. And
yeah.
how, because when I watched that, and the anger and the righteous anger and frustration and fear that was in your piece, how shocking was it to sort of connect that to sort of a mystery? Was it a sense of, this is fair play? Like, I knew that while going through the election that Clinton was going to lose and Trump would win, and this is what America is, and I'm not surprised? Or it really was a sense of like, wait a minute, this person was the killer, but where did this person come from? You just surprised me. Was it like, how did it strike you when the election outcome came?
Well, you know, I was fortunate for one reason. And this is funny to talk about now that we've lived through a global pandemic, because this is behavior you wouldn't do now. And this, well, some people would, Republicans would. But anyway, I had a fever for about 3 days. I had been really sick. And I don't run fevers often. It was well over 100. I was throwing a party. I had one of those secret Hillary groups where we were all getting beat up online by Bernie supporters and Republicans. And so we started a secret, group online, and it was like 4,000 members before we had to cut off, membership, because it was just getting kind of too crazy. So we had a strong community here in Los Angeles, and I was like, I'm going to throw a party. Hopefully she'll win, but without really thinking about what it would be like if she didn't win. And then the day of the election, I told myself I was feeling better, and I wasn't. I was just kidding myself. I was like, no, I'm on the mend. I'm like, Tess, you have to see this through. You've got all these people coming to your house tonight. You can't cancel. And then somewhere that evening, 3 things became apparent. She was losing. I wasn't really better. And I had about 60 people in my house.
Oh my God.
And who were all now the most depressed people on the planet. And there was one person who was among the last people to leave. And she was a woman who I didn't know. She had come with someone who had come with someone. Like, that's, So the people she had come with had already left. She's on her way out the door with the last stragglers. And I hear her say to whoever she's leaving with, I don't know anyone here. I just didn't want to go home and be alone.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God. Also, I have a fever. Please go. So I spent the next day very much kind of numb and in shock and still very much with a fever. So I got to sleep pretty much through the whole next day of, which was a little bit like taking a pill in a sense to not feel just the profound sadness and devastation of it. And I guess if the question is, did it catch me off guard? Was it a surprise? I mean, I don't think it was a huge surprise, because I think we knew, we saw the misogyny, right? We saw the disinformation unfolding. So I wasn't I don't know if you had this experience. Every Black friend I knew was like, we could have told you this was going to happen. So I wasn't like, I knew this was going to happen level, but I was like, I couldn't be shocked because I had seen so much, of the misogyny coming out. But I also saw a lot of the enthusiasm, which never got reported. And, there was also this sense of just anger and frustration because we stopped the vote count early. Who knows what would have happened had we allowed it to go on like we did in 2020. There's 80,000 votes that never got counted in Detroit, and she only lost Michigan by 11,000. Things like that it's just so frustrating still, I think about it.
I'd been watching some Mad Men clips recently. I just think I mentioned this to you offline, and it occurred to me how this show, set in the 1960s, had aired predominantly during the Obama administration. And it makes you think, of course, this show that people liked, very popular. It's about the sexist white male but we're going to say he's still charming and everything. And white men run the world, even though a black man is president, and even though a woman could be president, just run for office or whatever, we're sort of kind of almost commemorating a former period in time. And, obviously I enjoy the show. I know people behind it would say, oh, characters like Bert Cooper, Roger Sterling, we're talking about how this is the end of their reign.
Yeah.
But then is it? Because then Trump won and it's like, no, I think Bert Cooper and Roger Sterling are in the White House. I would love it if Roger Sterling he's better than Trump. So it's, it makes you wonder, it makes you think about, was this a reaction to the rights movement, to women in power and minorities in power? I don't know. Though I do get fussy sometimes about the idea of this big question of art, right? Like what you can do, because, all right, well, your project has no roles for Black people and has no roles for women who don't look a certain way, because they have to, for realism's sake, have to be able to get in the pencil skirt and whatever and have to be white. You're sort of putting a whites only on the casting for all your major leads. Is that really what you should be doing? Is that, it's a question of what, because ultimately it has a real world impact. These are lives, these are careers that get started, and
yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I was having this discussion with my husband recently about, and it's not even a friend wrote a spec, and just 2 male leads, and it's a traditionally white world. Their work, it's modern times, but it's largely a predominantly white world. Like let's say it's NASCAR, but it's not NASCAR, right? But it along those lines. And I had suggested, after reading the script, it's a very funny script. There's nothing not great about it, but I said, have you thought about making the other guy Black? Because there are Black players. They're not, all over the place, but I think it could add depth to this. It'll add some conflict between the characters. You can explore this a little more. It'll create some nuances and complexities, which I think are great. And if you're pitching any sort of script, you're pitching it for series, and it's like, where do these people go past the pilot? Where do they go after season 1? That kind of thing. And, ultimately, I said to my husband, look, he can choose to change it or not change it. I just don't really want to watch a show with 2 good old boy white men in it anymore. That's just not, not what I want to do. And not enough people, to me, it's not enough people are having these conversations. And when they do, there's a lot of perfunctory things that happen without really kind of playing out. Well, who is this person in this space then? What are those nuances and complexities? But, I mean, look, Hollywood is, I'm not surprised that show becomes popular and gets made in Hollywood, because it's a business that's largely sexist, racist. It's good old boy network, and they have a romanced way of how things used to be done, just like every other industry. So it sort of makes sense that somebody pitched it and some executives were like, yes.
Yeah, it's, when you're watching television today, or film or whatever,
Whatever we watch.
do you see anything that is a true kind of reaction to the Trump era, to this, that you think is speaking from the people impacted, especially women like yourself? And do you feel like that's given enough of a voice, or is that is that even occurring?
I mean, the unfortunate thing about media today is that there's so much of it, you can't track all of it.
Mhm.
So any answer I give is really like what's come across my radar that I've watched and that I find sticky, which is going to be a very small slice of what's out there to watch. So, I mean, I guess I don't find anything that is an adequate sort of reaction to what's happening in the world, because, and you touched on this earlier, I think for, a host of reasons, but some of it's just, privilege and cluelessness. When they want to use diverse voices, if they want to talk about people of color, they only know how to do sad porn.
Mhm.
And that to them is meaningful, and showing families and people of color thriving isn't as often the things that get made necessarily. And I hate that, like people, you get one or the other, right? like both are valuable. There are sad stories that need telling, so that to raise awareness. There's also really happy stories that need telling, and I hate that it becomes just really polarized, and you don't it's one or the other. And I think too often it leans towards, like, it's like, yeah, we got Handmaid's Tale. Great. That book's been around for 40 years. No one paid attention the first time, which is how we ended up here. But I sure as hell don't want to watch it after after I watch Rachel Maddow on MSNBC.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The Handmaid's Tale was also interesting to me because that was often the discussion of, in a dystopian world, or if Trump were to win, or conservatives to reign. And often I think sometimes it's hard for people to connect to something that's dystopian, or to, like, as I say, like, it's 1984, because to me, I would say, okay, well, here's Richard Wright's Black Boy, which is set in an America that existed in the 1940s, where Black people lived in a fascist state. Like, it's horrifying, and arguably worse than 1984, that kind of thing, of where there's double talk and the treatment that's real. And so often, especially if you have a mantra like "Make America Great Again," it's like, well, women used to not be able to have credit cards or bank accounts, and we don't show that. So the idea is only like, this is something that could potentially happen in some kind of Twilight Zone reality, as opposed to, no, your grandmother, I mean, it wasn't just, watching Grease or Happy Days, and you're like, well, that doesn't seem so bad,
Yeah. Those
right?
are fun outfits.
Yeah. And it's like the Charleston, or even the stuff of Bridgerton, right? Because it's like, oh, well, was pleasant. It's like, it's a nuts.
No, yes, I thank you. And yeah, I always say, like, great for whom? Who was it great for? Because it really wasn't great for most of us. We know who it was great for. And they look like everyone who, in that party who gets elected. It's so funny. I never finished House of Mirth because it was so just distressing to me that, here's this woman and she has to navigate society by getting married. But, she was an orphan, I think, or, she didn't have a big money behind her. So she has to sort of so her options are very limited, and she has to make the best of limited options within this terrible society. And man, I was like, I just can't. This feels
No,
really
no.
depressing. Yeah.
Well, years ago, and I used to read a lot of Jane Austen and Edith Wharton. I would tell a friend, it was like, Jane Austen is like hanging with your very witty, awesome friend, and it's like great, and you're having drinks, and just like, and Edith Wharton is like, oh my God, you're awesome, but I just need a break. You're kind of bleak.
Yeah.
Like oh my God, I just can't. It's too much. Maybe if you bring Jane, can bring Jane with us? We'll hang out, all three of us, but just you and me alone.
Yeah.
This can't, I can't vibe, just the two of us. And she's great, but it's always of like, and it's so true. I mean, that's what I think her stuff is more reflective of reality, especially of the periods, and just smacking you in the face. And it's like, yikes. But that's was real. And we often don't see a lot of that. And I think that's the tough stuff.
It was real, and it resonates still, I think. And when, someone asked me, I think he thought he was being funny. Like, if my husband wrote my joke, he told me he thought my jokes were funny. I was submitting for a job, and then he asked me if my husband wrote them. This is in the last 10 years. Like, it's very, as you mentioned, women couldn't get credit cards. It's still very real. So this idea of it being great again, it wasn't great for most of us.
That's why you want to read a book set in Italy.
Yeah. I mean,
it was fun. Though granted, Italy has its own fascism problems as well.
I think when we entertain as I'm doing right now every day, when I'm like, what am I going to do if he wins again? Right. When we entertain our fantasies of leaving this country and going somewhere else, I mean, first of all, it's because we want to live somewhere with a beach or great food or wine, or we want to be able to go to Bruges on the weekends. There's a lot of reasons we entertain these fantasies, right? But one of it is, I almost think and I don't think we're conscious of it unless we really break it down, is, we just want to go somewhere where we don't understand the language they're speaking as easily. So we can ignore all the stuff we hate about our own country when it crops up there, and it's like all the countries that you always hear about different places in Scandinavia or wherever, like, oh, they've got a great, national health, or they have a great standard of living, or whatever, high literacy. And it's like, well, those places also, there's a huge tax rate, and they don't like people who don't look like them very much. Like there's good and bad everywhere, not to malign all of Scandinavia, but like, it's like, we're just looking for a fantasy of like, please, I don't want to be here right now.
For the time we have left, I would just say, you have a fifth Kelly book coming out, correct?
I do not. I've got, look what I happen to have.
Yes,
here.
please show.
So I have got 4 books that are out at the moment. Plus, I did a holiday novella when we were all in lockdown, called Buon Natale, just to give people a little bit of a, hey, we're not going anywhere, and these holidays might be grim. And so this is the first year in the last several that I haven't written a new one.
But is one coming up, or do you have it in your mind?
I hope to write one in the next year. I've been kind of playing with where I want to set it. I just found, my creativity went in a different direction this year. And there's a lot of, I think, frustration around the book business and around what's going on. And I think that it was, I think the frustration I was feeling wasn't conducive to feeling creative about tackling a new one. And, yeah.
Do you do the audibles? Are there audibles available?
No. And, I have to do it. It's one of those things, not to get in our own way, but we do get in our own way, is because I have such a performance background, and because the books are written so much in my voice, I want to do the books myself. But it's, have you read a book out loud? mean, forget like having to line up. You have to line up the right scenario and pay for it, and quality control and all of that stuff. So it's a not a small financial investment. But on top of that, it's hard on the voice. Like, kudos to the people who do it for a living.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I did it for my first book, and I thought I was like 3 hours into a 2-day thing, and I thought my throat was going to explode.
Well, your memoir, so Tess's memoir, is available on Audible. I've listened. You did a great job. I enjoyed. My wife and I used to do a lot of road trips. When our son, especially, was young, he was like just a little small baby. We listened to Rosemary's Baby in the car. It's like, it's okay. It won't traumatize him. Mia Farrow does a great job. Like, she comes back and she recorded and she was probably in her mid-70s at the time, but she was able to capture her Rosemary when she was in her 20s and all the other characters as well, which is great. And to your point, which I was very impressed by, because there are, those performances, so every character, and to be able to keep track of it, to be sort of, this is where I am in my register or my accent for this character, to kind of come back and to keep that continuity is like very impressive. I always love them because it's like almost like an old radio show, which I'm geeky enough to have enjoyed. So I think they would be, your mysteries would be perfect in that context. But obviously, I would prefer if it was your voice that we heard, that we wouldn't have to like train. Is there like vocal training or something you would have to do, or to?
It's funny. It got easier. I will say that the first morning, I think I was only 2 hours into it or something, and I was like, I don't know if I can do this for the next day and a half. And I went and I got some really hot tea with a lot of honey, and it went fine the next day and a half. So I think you do get used to it. And it's one of those, man, I mean, we could do a whole episode on what, keeping all these plates spinning as a creative when, there's so little, without getting the amount of financial compensation we should be getting for these endeavors, right? Like, I guess I don't know how else to say it. But I hope that whatever the next phase of media and everything is, it involves people not having to get paid, $8 at a time. Like this sort of notion of the Patreon economy and everything. Like, I'd like to see, like, can we figure out how people can know what they're going to be making week to week and month to month, so that we can take on some of these projects.
Before we go, could you tell us a bit about the Kamala portrait behind you?
Yes. Is this going to be video? Should I turn so people can see it?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. All right. So there you go. So that Kamala picture was done by my dear friend Tony Purrier, who is an artist, and but he is also a writer, and he has also had many hats in his life. He was a chef for a while. If you ever follow him anywhere, he's always cooking up something amazing in his kitchen. He was the first Black screenwriter to write a $100 million blockbuster action movie, which was Eraser, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he also is a beautiful artist. He did that painting behind me. He did the picture of Hillary Clinton that was from her 2008 campaign, where it's kind of like her on the side, and then there's the sort of rays in back of her, and I believe that's Smithsonian. Yeah, that was him. He also draws the comic book or the graphic novel Concrete Park, that he co-writes with Erica Alexander, and he did my covers. He's done all my book covers because I'm lucky enough to know him, and he has given it that sort of extra, that we're always like, make people think like travel with a hint of murder.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, so where can folks find your books and find you? I know you write for Dame and you have your own newsletter, but please tell it.
Oh, you can find me on Substack. It's /Tess Rafferty. It's my newsletter was called Recipes for Resistance, but I think you can just look under my name and find me. And my books are available on Amazon. And yeah, I know Amazon's not the Amazon's a problematic place for people to go to sometimes, but they give writers access, which is pretty cool.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been
Thank
such
you.
a pleasure.
I just want to ask you questions now. Like I'm like, I need another hour so I can interview you.
Well, yes. Well, maybe I'll end this and you'll ask me one, and then I'll post a YouTube clip of the question you had asked me. So, all right, everyone. Thanks so much. We'll catch you next time. Please like, share, subscribe, and thank you.